We've been in this corner before. Our little corner has been in the Borders Books corner before for other authors, and now we're with Kate Messner. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Took us so long to schedule this. You're such a busy...
Oh, it's a busy time of year.
And you and I don't see each other very often, although we don't live very far apart.
I know.
You're still in Cliff Haven?
I am.
I should have known that.
Yep.
Married to the famous meteorologist Tom Messner, but Kate is way more famous than Tom will.
No. I always tell him I can still go to the grocery store and nobody notices. That's the thing with writing.
I'm sorry, that doesn't happen with me anymore. That's all Calvin's fault. But I am so delighted to be here with you because, you know, I also like kids. On Kate's website, she says, I love kids and I love to write kids' books. And isn't it great?
It is. And it's really fun. It's been, having the first book come out has been a joy for me for so many reasons, but the biggest thing has been getting to talk to kids who have read it, because I was a huge reader growing up, and still am, but I just know how important that is to have books that you love.
How many times have I applauded parents and teachers and librarians who nurture kids with books? It's the name of the game.
Yeah, it is.
And if you could have been at my house on Christmas Eve, I'm sure your house was exciting. One of our little grandsons from Connecticut was there, and I'm a huge fan of children's books.
Oh, yeah.
I have a great collection of children's books, and I love to read children's books. I'm a Harry Potter fan.
Oh, me too.
But we gave our little grandson, who was 3 years old, a pop-up book. Because my earliest recollections are pop-up books as a kid. But the new pop-up books are crazy. You open it up and the thing jumps up this high, and the adults he was a little afraid of it. The adults loved
My
it.
parents stopped buying those because I'd always pull stuff out of them.
Oh,
I
no,
was
don't
one of
do
those
that.
active kids.
He tried, but his parents said, no, don't touch that.
Exactly.
It's fragile.
What do you give it, 2 weeks?
They're gone. I don't care. They're back in Connecticut. But reading is essential, to quote that used phrase. There's a wonderful lady who comes into the mall every Thursday and gives books to little kids and reads books. And I've been here with her and written about her. And isn't it wonderful?
It is so important, and for so many different reasons too.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I mean, it's the biggest predictor of academic success is kids who've just been read to. So
That's, if I didn't have anything else to thank my parents for, to thank them for putting up with me through that rocky childhood, it's because they read to me all the time, from the Bible and from the Reader's Digest, and then my own children's books, and through the years, reading.
yeah.
And isn't it marvelous, because it's, once again, harks back to imagination, that great song that Disney wrote many years ago, because the world of imagination, you're never bored.
No, and there's
If you have
something
a
about
book.
reading as a kid too, I think. Sometimes people will say, well, when are you going to write an adult book? And I don't think I will, because there's something about the books we read as kids, I think, that is just so different and so special. I think those books shape us as people in a way that books can't quite do when we're older. I think it's pretty cool.
And isn't it amazing that when you read a book as a 10-year-old, and then read a book as a year old, as I do, what a different perspective you get.
Oh, yeah.
Start with Gulliver's Travels, for example, or Alice in Wonderland.
Or Harry Potter.
Or Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But sometimes we underestimate our potential audiences some people do when they write books, and they say, no, an 8-year-old would never read Harry Potter. Guess what?
Yeah.
They devour
Yeah.
the books.
Kids need a lot of credit. They handle a lot more than we can give them credit for sometimes.
I do, and I love it. And now that we've laid that kind of groundwork, it's like getting the Lincoln Logs all set up on the table. Kate, where are you originally from?
I grew up in Medina, New York, which is a
Oh,
little
of
town.
course.
You know where that is? We have a
very
thruway
well.
exit.
Oh my God.
It's a very small town, about 7,000 people when I was growing up there. It's between Buffalo and Rochester in western New York.
I know it very well. Spent a lot of my misguided youth in that end of New York
No
State.
kidding.
And great to have you. So what brought you here to Plattsburgh?
Well, I used to work in television, news, as you know. I
Yes.
used to run into you with the microphone.
How well we know.
So I went from Medina to school in Syracuse. I went to Newhouse at Syracuse University
really?
for broadcast journalism, and then worked in Syracuse part-time in TV news for a while before I got my first full-time job in television, and that was at WPTZ.
Of course.
And so I worked there from about 19. Oh, you're going to test my dates. I worked there for a while, Gordy.
For a while. Way back when.
Yeah, and until 1996, when I had another calling pulling at me and got into teaching. My family is all educators, and that was always
Are they
something
really?
that was
That
sort
I
of
did
in the back
not
of
know.
my mind. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, my dad was a school superintendent.
Oh my.
And my mom was an elementary school art teacher, and I have a brother who was an industrial arts teacher, and a sister who's a high school science teacher. So that was kind of always pulling at me.
You
I
had the
went back
genes.
into that.
You
Yeah,
had the
yeah,
genes.
Yeah.
But it's not bad to get a background in communications.
No, I mean, I love that.
When you're talking
job.
about Newhouse, you're talking about the premier school of communications almost in the
Great
world.
school. Yeah.
I applied there, but I almost matriculated. They didn't have married housing, so I turned around in the driveway and went and drove away way back when. It's a great school.
Yeah, it was a great school.
So you spent a little time here. You met Thomas what year?
Met him right when I came here in 1992, I want to say.
So much water
Yeah.
over the proverbial dam
a while ago.
since the early
Yeah.
1990s. And since you got back into teaching, did you not have a teaching degree when you came here, or did you?
I did not. Nope, I went back and did that work at Plattsburgh State. I
Did
got my
you really?
master's in education at
So
Plattsburgh State.
fortunate to have an institution like
Yeah.
Plattsburgh State here that has
Absolutely.
cranked out so many wonderful teachers and nurses and many other fields.
Yeah, I have a lot of shadows from Plattsburgh State come into my classroom now.
Do
which is
you
nice.
really?
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
cool? So your teaching career started at Bailey Oak?
Nope, I've been at Stafford right since I started teaching. I'm
I
at Stafford
thought you
Middle
worked
School.
at Oak Street for a while. No.
No.
Right at Stafford.
No, my kids have gone through Oak Street, but not, no.
We are lucky to have a very, very good public and parochial school systems in this area. But the city schools are great. The Stafford Middle School has great history there.
It is a great place. It's the unique place to be. That's what Foxy Gagnon always said. The
Oh.
unique place to be, and it really is.
And Foxy's such a good guy. I hope his voice never clears up. He'll lose his image totally.
Yep.
So when did the writing begin? When did you get that bug?
I think when I was 7 or 6. It might have
Really?
been 6. I wrote a story. I remember Mrs. Enderby. I wrote a story about Susie throwing snowballs at her brother, and she put it up on the bulletin board right next to the spelling list. And I sat in my chair and looked at it up there and thought, "There's my story up there." And I always loved to write ever since I could hold a pencil. So it's something I've always done. But it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I got a little bit more serious about finishing a novel and starting to learn how to submit for publication, which can be a long process.
And frightening and discouraging sometimes.
Yeah, it takes a long time. You get a lot of rejections, but I think you also build up a pretty thick skin, and I've certainly learned a lot along the way, and I'm always thankful for that. That's one thing that
Thick
I am
skin is always a
a
good
lifelong
thing.
learner. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's wonderful to do that. Are you fortunate enough to have had your parents save any of the things you wrote when you were 7
Oh,
or 8
yeah.
years?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
As mine did.
Yep. Here and there.
They're interesting and ridiculous and fun. And I'm lucky enough that my mother never had any money, but later in life she would send me my report cards, which were a little embarrassing at times. But she would also send me my little essays,
Yeah.
and I would draw pictures with the things that I wrote and cut things out of magazines and paste them
Yeah.
in. And there were some early poems and
Yeah.
things like that. And so now they're treasures.
Yeah, they are. I love those things. When I think in summer after 2nd grade, I was wishing that I had a report to do because I loved research. Obviously one of the cool kids, but I loved research, and so I made up an assignment for myself to research sharks, and I have this little book called Shark Terror of the Sea
No,
that I did. And
come
yes,
on.
Terror
I
of
love
the
it.
Sea.
You
Isn't
should
that
have brought it here.
Catchy.
Oh, isn't
Yeah,
that
it
great?
did bring. But yeah, so I've always loved to write. It's just kind of getting back into it has been a real joy to rediscover that.
But when you decided to write children's historical novels seriously, you didn't pick little short subjects. You got some pretty sizable things here.
Well, Spitfire Spitfire came about because I'm fascinated with the Battle of Valcour Island.
How can you not be?
I don't know. It's my favorite. It's just there's something so compelling about that battle and about the American fleet escaping from the British through the fog that I've always been just intrigued by that. And this book came about because I was looking for literature to use when I taught my 7th graders. I do a lot of interdisciplinary teaching. I teach English, but I work very closely with our social studies teacher. And I was wishing that there were some, a children's novel about the Battle of Valcour Island, and so thought, gosh, maybe I should write one. Actually, I was joking with an educator from the Maritime Museum and saying, I know there's Rabble in Arms, but for adults, and it's wonderful, but what's out there for kids? He said, you ought to write one. And I don't think he knew that I wrote. I don't think he meant it. But a few months later, I called him up. I said, can you help me with some research? And I spent about a year and a half doing some more serious research with a lot of, diaries and journals from that time period. And an awful lot of revisions and an awful lot of rejections and a lot of writers' conferences and critiques eventually led to Spitfire.
It takes a long time from the time you put the first word on the
it still takes me a long time.
And the revisions are what is difficult for me.
Revisions are my
having
favorite
written
part.
news for all those years, you write it, you read it,
and you hand it over. Yes.
And it's gone.
In 20 minutes sometimes, or less.
But to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it until you get it the way you want it is very, very difficult for me.
I'm the opposite right now. I think that used to be the case, and right now, for me, I would so much rather revise than draft. First drafts, I have to make myself, if I'm in the middle of a first draft of something, I have to force myself to sit down, and I think of and I say, well, I can't write yet, I don't have tea, and I can't write yet because, somebody might need a cup of juice. Because there's nothing there. There's just nothing on that blank page. Sometimes that's scary for me.
Sometimes the muses don't show up at 9 o'clock in the morning.
You wonder if they'll show up. My muse has to come at 9 o'clock at night after my kids are in bed.
Yeah, that's true too.
But once I have it there, then for me, that's the fun part, is starting to play with it and shape it. And once it's all there,
the child is born.
I know I can do it. Yeah.
See, for me, it's just the opposite. The words flow. Thank goodness. I don't have anything seriously published now. I hope to have a book soon. But writing, the first draft is easy for me because the words are there. They're there somewhere. And then they come down through your fingers.
And they do. And I have enough confidence now to know that if I show up, they'll come. But showing up is hard sometimes. Whereas if I revise, I know that they're already there waiting for me, and I can go. I don't know. It's interesting.
Do you write in longhand or do you write on the...
No, I write on a computer. I write on my Mac. Yeah.
And I know a lot of very good writers who refuse to write on a keyboard. Write longhand.
Yeah.
We have so much to talk about.
I think Joyce Carol Oates, I heard Joyce Carol Oates had, a friend of mine heard her speak at the Burlington Book Festival, and I think she still writes out stories longhand first.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
Great. We got so much to talk about.
I know.
We'll continue the interview in just a moment. We paused for a moment just so Calvin could recharge his batteries. Our batteries are all charged up here this morning. It dawns on us that many people may not know what your name was when you were on television, Kate Shirmer.
Well, yeah, I'm Kate Messner now, but when I worked in television, it was Kate Shirmer. That's my maiden name, and that was the name I used actually through my television career, even though Tom and I got married and sort of in the middle of that career. You don't usually show up and change your name in the middle of a TV week, so.
Isn't that interesting? But you've never used a nom de plume, have you? You've never used a special writing name?
No, I think I would get too confused. I have enough trouble with answering to my name when people call me anyway and paying attention. I don't know if I had a different name, if I would even be able to acknowledge that if somebody called me that. So.
That's funny, and I don't know if it's ego or what it is, but many people in the radio and television business, the first thing they want to do is go on camera or go on the microphone with a different name. And that never dawned on me. The closest I got to changing my name was Gordy Little, Who's He? And that's almost completely forgotten by people who are still alive. That's a long time ago, Kate Shirmer Messner. So anyway, it's Kate Messner now.
Yeah.
And there was never a question in your mind that you would keep that name for writing.
Why confuse things?
Why?
Yeah.
But is your given name Kate or is it Catherine?
It's actually Lynn Catherine.
It's Lynn
Yeah.
Catherine?
Yep. Because my parents had a big argument before I was born, and my father, they knew they wanted to call me Kate, but my father really liked Lynn Catherine, and my mother said, no, that'll be confusing because people will call her Lynn on the first day of school every year, but my father sort of had a more dominant personality, and so Lynn Catherine I was, and then every day on the first day of school they would say, Lynn, is Lynn here? And of course I wouldn't pay attention because no one ever called me that, and then they thought I didn't pay attention, which wasn't very fair because I did.
See, superintendents always have more dominant personalities. Is it? So your middle name
Is
was Catherine with a K.
Right. Yep.
It's interesting because my wife's first name is Catherine with a C, and everybody calls her K, K-A-Y-E,
K-A-Y, yeah.
except for some of our children who call her May, because her middle name is May, and that's what her father called her.
And so they liked that?
So isn't that interesting?
Yep.
All right. What's the genesis of Spitfire from the very beginning? We know you love the battle.
I love the battle, and the big thing when I started researching, I knew I wanted to write about the battle, but I was not quite sure. A lot of times I'll start with an idea for a story, but I'm not sure who gets to tell the story yet. And one of the things I found when I was researching Spitfire was that one of the participants in the Battle of Alcor Island was a 12-year-old boy.
Yes.
His name was Pascal DeAngelis, and actually kept a diary. And that diary was published in part in Vermont History Magazine and actually exists in its entirety at Oswego right now. And it just intrigued me because I taught 7th graders at the time and thought, my gosh, I can't imagine one of my 7th graders living this life out on a 45-foot long boat. It was a very crowded space. The conditions were unbelievably difficult. They couldn't really leave the boats, and there were 45 men packed onto each one. And imagining what that must have been like for this boy. And his name was Pascal DeAngelis. And he had kind of an interesting history. His family was in the West Indies and was on their way to Connecticut. They were going to start a new life, have land, and his father died on board the boat during the journey. They didn't have the medicine that we have today, and people also didn't stay single for very long back then. His mother married the ship captain. So instead of going with his mother and father to Connecticut, Pascal ended up going to Old Saybrook, Long Island, with his mother and his new stepfather. And that was right about the time that Benedict Arnold on Lake Champlain put out his call for sailors, saying, look, anybody with experience sailing, we need you here to help defend Lake Champlain. The stepfather says, well, I have experience. You can come with me. And the theory is, we don't know this for sure, but most likely he would have been paid a little bit extra for bringing the kid. So that's how Pascal ended up on our lake.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So the story grew from that little germ?
It did. Well, originally, it did. And then there's kind of a funny story. This book was originally called Stories of War, and it was a time travel story. It was about a kid who was scuba diving and had a problem scuba diving and then found himself losing consciousness and sort of slipping into the consciousness of a boy from the 18th century.
What a great concept.
Well, I liked it at the time. But what happened was this boy who was going scuba diving had a friend named Abby, and she was kind of a clumsy red-haired girl. And this was in modern times. And she was in the book for the first 7 pages, but then, of course, when he slipped back into time, he went back in time and he met Pascal, and sort of that part of the story took place. I had a manuscript critique at a writer's conference on this manuscript I had in my hand, and it was my first book, and I was so proud that I'd finished it, and was actually called the World of Children's Literature Conference they used to do in Lake Placid.
Oh yes, been there, done that.
Yep. And the manuscript critique was with an agent from an agency in California, and she was very nice, and she said, well, the good news is you can write. And I said, thanks. And she said, but here's the thing.
Thanks, I think.
This time travel thing isn't working. You're going to have to lose the time travel. I said, oh. And she said, and the other thing is, your best character in this book disappears on page 8. I said, you mean Abigail? She said, yeah, the girl with the red hair. She's like the best character. And she's gone after the 8th page. I said, oh. She said, so you ought to work her into the rest of the book. And then my 15 minutes was up and I had to leave. So I went home and I thought, well, I can get rid of the time travel, I guess, but I was really troubled by the idea that the best character was this kind of minor character that I made up, and I liked her too, but I didn't see her as that powerful. I thought, you know what, I'll try anything, and that's always my philosophy with revisions. If an editor says try this or try that, I'll try anything. So I thought, how can I work her into the rest of the story? I thought, well, I can't really work her into the rest of the story because there were no women on board these gunboats. I mean, to get her into the rest of the story, I'd have to cut off her hair and dress her up like a boy. And then I thought, I could do that. And so that was how the main character of this book, Abigail, came about. She was a character plucked from modern times and put into historical times, and she disguised herself as a boy. So that's how the other main character in Spitfire came to be.
Isn't this so interesting?
Yeah,
how
books
that...
have journeys. You have no idea the books that you read, the journeys that they've been through.
But the time travel thing is a good concept, and a lot of wonderful books have been built around
I don't
that.
think I did it very well. I think
Really?
it is. There are good books that have been built about it, and I don't know. I should go back and read that draft. I have that draft at home, and I haven't revisited it, but I don't think I had pulled it off.
How many people watching this program have not wished, sometimes fervently, that they could step into a time machine
Well, yeah,
and go back,
I'm one of them. As long as I could get back after.
as we all are. Sometimes we wouldn't want to actually interact
Yeah.
at that time, but
But
just
to
to
see.
view it.
Yeah.
You know, you watch slides, you see people's travelogues through Europe or Ireland or wherever it might be,
Yeah.
and you wish you could go back and see when they were building that castle
And
or
honestly,
fighting that battle.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I write historical fiction. Writing historical fiction, I think you get to time travel a little bit.
Oh, there's no
because
question.
especially my books are both in these two books are both in written in first person, and you have to really get there in your mind to be able to write in first person. So that's part of the appeal for me is that time
So
travel.
they call it the voice, and it took you a while to find the voice for this book.
It always takes me a while to find
Yeah.
the voice, yeah. This
Yeah.
book started, it started in, actually, the first draft was in third person. And it was with
Oh,
this,
it was?
yeah, it was.
Now, are we talking 5 years ago? How long?
I started writing Spitfire 8 years ago. About
No
8 years
kidding,
ago.
right around 2000.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe 2001. But yeah, about 8 years ago. And I wasn't writing that whole time. You know, about a year was honest to goodness hard research work, and then maybe about a year was writing. But there were probably 4 more years of submitting it and then letting it go for a while, and then coming back to it and working for a little bit, and then getting frustrated and putting it aside. And you know those stories. I know, Gordy. You're a writer too, so.
Well, you know, I've often thought from my own point of view, where does this inspiration come from? Who are these muses? I've interviewed hundreds of authors and other folks who say that ultimately these characters take on a life of their own. And rather than you speaking to them, they speak to you. Have you ever had that? Have you ever
On the very
written
best
so
days.
long into the
Yeah.
night
Yeah.
that you say, where did that paragraph come from?
I always write at night because I teach during the day,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then I'm
yeah.
a mom too, and
That's
so I'm
interesting.
after school. I'm going to soccer practice
sure.
and ballet practice, and so usually it's about 9 o'clock when I sit down at my computer, and I'll write from 9 to 11 or 9 to 12, or if I really get going, from 9 to 1, and then I pay for it the next day.
Oh, of course.
But there are days when I will sit down the next day or on a Saturday morning and pull up something that I've written, and almost always there's something there that surprises me. I'll
But
say,
that's good.
"Oh,
That's
I really
good.
like that. How about that?" And I don't know that I
Yeah.
could come up with some of them if I weren't pretty deep into the writing process. So.
You know, I've always been fascinated about what influences us. Not only the people we talk to on a regular basis, the books we read, the research that we do, but that other dimension
Yeah.
that affects us, and you never know. When I said those muses, goodness knows where they come from or what they're trying to say for you or what the original plan for your writing life might have been.
And you sound a little flaky sometimes when you talk
I
about
don't
it.
either.
You know,
Yeah, I'm old
When
enough, so I
say,
don't
"Well, was
even
listening
care."
to this character, but you do get
Yeah.
into a point, and it's your subconscious. I think has. That's one of the things that I like about writing. When I write, I can pull off things that my conscious brain right now can't do. If you said write a paragraph,
Yeah.
I can't do that in the way that I can if I've been writing for an hour and it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm there in that place.
I just wondered if you are like I am and like many other writers are, in that you have a ritual when you write. Do you have to have a cup of tea? Do you have to have a certain setting?
I used to be a much fussier writer. I used to have to be at my desk, and there used to have to be nobody around, and I used to have to be guaranteed that the phone wouldn't ring and that the kids wouldn't wake up. But I'm finding that writing time in my life is not enough writing time, and so I've gotten much more flexible about, like this Christmas vacation, I've been trying really hard to finish a draft of a new novel. And I really thought it was going to be about a 45,000 word book, but it really wasn't done at 45,000 words. And so it ended up being about 60,000, and it felt like the novel that wouldn't end no matter how many times I sat down to work on it. And I worked in a lot of, fits and starts over vacation because the kids aren't home and I want to be with everybody, and I didn't want to go lock myself in the office, or there's a corner of the public library that I always work in. There's one little corner in the public library, and they're very nice to me over there. And I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to be around everybody, but still working. And I just sat up on the sun porch, and the kids were in and out. And I find that I'm not as fussy as I used to be about writing rituals in place and space.
That's because you find it easier to get into the zone. You've been there before. You know how to get there from here.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And the other thing is deadlines work wonders,
Oh, believe me, we've worked under deadlines. When you have to have a lesson plan for 8 o'clock the next morning, right? As a teacher, you have to do it.
Yeah, or in news. But it's a different kind of deadline. You have to be creative by such and such a date for me, is more pressure than even those really tough news deadlines were when I worked in TV.
It's interesting now for me in writing a weekly column.
Yeah.
I know I have to have a column there by every Tuesday morning.
People like me are looking for it.
And whether or not you can come up with a topic the night before, you say, okay, please give us some help.
Yeah.
So Spitfire was published what year?
September of 2007.
2007. So it's been around a while.
Yeah.
You've made the rounds of interviews and so on. And are you satisfied with the response?
Oh, it's been great. Yeah. This book has, I was just happy to have a book out there published. It thrilled me that other people were going to read it. Actually, first it terrified me that other people were going to read it. The day that this came out, I was at school, and Tom called me up, called me up on my cell phone and said, "I'm at Borders. I came up to Borders to see your book." He said, "There's a big rack of them up front."
Don't you love it?
And I was, it scared me for a minute. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I kind of wanted to hide behind book racks and see if anybody looked at them, But I actually came up after school that day and walked into the door, and I was actually doing a signing the following weekend. So they had a beautiful display of, 50 copies of Spitfire there. And it was thrilling, but at the same time, it's, your book is your book for so long that it's yours.
It's your baby.
And there it was in Borders for anybody to pick up. I had this moment where I wanted to gather them all up and run, But I didn't. I left them there, and I'm sure bells and alarms would have gone off anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting feeling. So I was just thrilled to have it out there. And then there were surprises along the way that were wonderful. I got to talk to a lot of kids at schools. I do a lot of school visits, and that's been a joy. And getting, cards from kids. I had a class in Saranac. I got a package in the mail, and they had illustrated it with more illustrations, color illustrations.
No, isn't that? Don't you love it?
Oh, they were incredible. I've got them up in my office now. But beautiful, beautiful illustrations, and I love those. And was it last June, I got a call from the Adirondack Center for Writing saying, "Are you coming to the Adirondack Literary Awards?" And I said, "Oh gosh, I was going to, but my brother-in-law's in town. I don't think I'm going to make it." And the director said, "You really ought to come to the Adirondack. I really hope you could come to this event." And I thought, okay, maybe Tom's brother would like to go. And so we hauled everybody down there, and Spitfire had won the literary award for young people's literature.
I was going to get to that. I'm so
So that was, you asked about the moments along the way in the year. That was a great thing, too.
Wasn't it a wonderful thing? And that's congratulations, because it isn't often that a first effort like this gains such tremendous wide acclaim from people whose opinions you really trust. Not to mention the little kids who love it.
Well, those are the people whose opinions I trust the most, are the kids. So
and how many times, I was just thinking, as you said, when you go to schools, of course you go to school every day.
I do.
But when you go to schools, Tom has done this and I've done it so many times, and you get back and the kids write you notes and draw you pictures
Yeah.
of what it was meant to them for you to be in the school, that's what it's worthwhile.
It's really nice.
And your husband is indeed your biggest fan. Every time I see him and ask him how things are going, he tells me what's new in the life of his famous wife.
Well, he's been phenomenal. I mean, he actually, when the first book came out, he declared himself my roadie and carried the boxes of books around. So yeah, he's been very excited. Well, he knows that I love to write. He knows having a book published has been a lifelong dream. So he's been incredibly supportive and excited with really every step along the way this past year.
So you'll continue to write forever and ever, I'm sure.
I will.
Once the bug has bitten you.
Yeah.
But have you ever thought, I mean, since this is the first one, this was in the nomenclature of this field, this was your first baby.
Yep.
Have you ever thought of volume 2?
A sequel to
A
Spitfire?
sequel with the same characters?
No. And kids ask that question all the time.
I would. I mean, when you finish this book and put it down, it's like you've only had the first 2 courses of the meal. It cries.
You think?
Yeah,
Even with the epilogue?
Calvin and I feel the same way about our local history.
Yeah.
We're steeped in it.
Yeah.
Every square
Oh, yeah.
inch
Well, it's amazing.
of
We're
this
so
area.
lucky.
We're so
Yeah.
lucky in that respect. And this battle has occupied our minds as well as yours for a long,
Yeah.
long time. So why not? Maybe you can write the first 5 books and then go back.
I never say never, for sure. I will never say never
There's a lot
because you
to be
never
said
quite
for
know when a character's going to talk to you again. But for right now, anyway, I feel good about where Abigail and Pascal are, and that was one of the reasons that I wrote the epilogue was because I had that idea of, and I don't want to give things away, but for folks who haven't read the book, no spoilers in this interview.
You can.
But that I finished the book and it didn't feel done, and then I thought they had unfinished business, and so that was what my epilogue was meant to take care of, I guess. So, but to me, I'm happy with where they are, and I know they're in a good place. And sometimes you like to leave your characters that way and let them go.
Sometimes epilogues are too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
I've read epilogues where I said, big
Yes.
mistake.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
Yeah.
But so you're happy with it, and that's as it should be.
I was very happy with it.
Now that it's had time to mature and it's still selling copies. I imagine a few people bought it for their kids at Christmas time.
I signed a few of them, so
Did you
and that's
really?
always really nice. When I know somebody's, picked up one of my books for a gift for somebody. That to me, just knowing that a kid's going to read it is great.
That's great. I'm so glad you didn't put the pen down after that.
Me too.
And you came, when did this one start?
Champlain and the Silent One came out just this September. And this was a book that I was actually working on even before Spitfire was published. So and it came about sort of in the same way. I was kind of thinking, gosh, what books are we going to use when we teach the quadricentennial? And there really wasn't anything out there that told that part of history for young people. Sometimes our local history, we have a lot of books for adults, but there hasn't been a whole lot of local history for younger people. And to me, if you're young growing up here, it's easy to miss that. I mean, you can complain because maybe the mall isn't as big as the mall in Buffalo or Rochester, and maybe there's not as much to do sometimes, but we have resources here that are natural and historical resources that are unbelievable, that I really think young people need to know about and be proud of, to be proud that they are growing up on Lake Champlain. So I knew I wanted to write something that tied in with 1609, with the 400th anniversary of Champlain coming up, and spent a lot of time reading Champlain's journal. I mean, we were fortunate that Samuel de Champlain left us several volumes of his voyages, including a really detailed account of his voyage from Quebec to Lake Champlain, where he encountered the Iroquois in what's now Ticonderoga. Is it a perfect account? Is it an unbiased account? Not by any stretch. That's one of the things I talk to kids about when I do school visits. But it is an account, and it begins to give us a picture of what it might have been like, what that voyage might have been like. And this book, the more I read, the more I realized that I wanted my version of it to come from the other side of the canoe, to come from a native voice, which was a challenge for me because I'm not of native descent.
The other side of the canoe, I like that, Kate.
And I think writing from a point of view, when you're not of that, origin is difficult and challenging and carries a lot of responsibility too. So I did an awful lot of research on the Innu tribe, and so Silent One, the main character in this book and the narrator of this story, is Innu, which is a tribe that permanent territory is up on the Saguenay River in what's now Quebec, and their hunting grounds extended as far south as Quebec, which is of course where Samuel de Champlain had his the first permanent settlements in New France, and where my main character meets Champlain and sort of forms that bond with him that leads them to travel together, and that's what this book is about.
So it's almost exactly the same length, or a little bit longer than Spitfire, right?
I believe it's a little bit longer, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah.
A little bit longer. And took a little longer to write?
No, it was actually a little bit quicker to write. And that was one of the big challenges with this book was, when there's a world of difference between 1776 and 1609 when it comes to the resources that are available. The Innu people didn't have written language. Their oral histories are around now to some degree, but take an awful lot more digging to uncover and find accounts and compare those accounts and read the scholarship. So Champlain really kept the only diary of this time period, of this particular voyage. So I had that one account, and what I kind of had to do was research the culture and the values and the ways of life of the Innu people, and then try to view that account in Champlain's journal through this other lens, which is what I tried to do. It was fun and interesting. I mean, I learned a lot doing it too.
So you interpolated.
Yeah, well, that's what we do a lot in historical fiction.
Really
you take the facts that are there and then try to tell the story that's true to those facts and true to the facts that maybe aren't there, but as best you can tell.
But when you published Spitfire, you had this you'd already started this.
When North Country Books decided they wanted to publish this, it was, I don't remember the timeline, but there's always a gap between when a publisher says, yes, we want your book, and when it actually comes out.
Oh, as
Have
well
you heard
we
about
know.
that?
As well we know.
And usually with a large, like with national publishers, that gap is usually well over a year and sometimes 2 years or more. This was a little less than that. I want to say it was maybe a year and change. So actually it was less than a year. But they accepted this book, and then I was, thinking, what do I want to do next? And I had started this book and said, are you interested in this other book? And I was thinking, gosh, maybe they'll tell me they're interested now, and I can write a book under contract already. And they said, we're interested, finish it, and then we'll look at it and let you know. So we did that. And actually they ended up, I told them I was working on it and that it would tie in with the quadricentennial. They said, that's great, send it when you're done. And I wasn't done, and they, right after Spitfire came out, I guess they were pleased with how that was doing. They emailed and said, where's that Champlain book you mentioned? And I said, I'm not quite finished. And they said, well, could you send us what you have so we can look and maybe decide if we want to get it on the schedule? And that was what I did. So they accepted it, and I said, please understand I'm not done revising. But sometimes I would never be done revising if somebody didn't take it away from me, so that's okay. So they decided in about a year before this one came. Well, in last December. So about a year ago now, they decided were interested in that.
So one whirlwind dies down and the other one starts circulating again.
Yeah.
So you're now right in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
Because we're recording this just a few days after Christmas and a few days before a brand new year, which we hope, at least on my life, will have a different impact than the year turning the centuries did. But we will launch ourselves into 2009 with great trepidation because of a lot of things. And that's why it's nice to be able to escape into something like Champlain and the Silent One. Are you delighted with the response so far?
I am. And it's been I've actually got a few more books coming out in the future, so it's sometimes even hard to go back and talk about a book that, as you know, you work on a book for a long time, but by the time everybody else can talk about it with you, you're on to some other project, and So that's interesting too. But yeah, it's been a great year, and I am delighted. I really am.
You
It's
know,
been great talking with kids about the books. mostly.
Talking to you here is like talking to somebody who made a movie and finished it 2 years ago, and it's not coming out until next spring. And then you can see the people trying to remember, and they've been coached into
Come on,
saying
I thought
all
I
the
was
right
doing all
things.
right.
They're already 4 projects past that. But anyway, it's good for you.
That's been great. I
You've
love
done
it.
how many? Have you done a lot of book signings so far?
A few here and there. Yeah, I mean, I had maybe 8 or so different things going on this fall, and probably about the same last year.
How many people respond? You have a very colorful website. How many people respond to that?
I get interesting emails. For
Do you
sure.
really?
Yeah, I mean, and it's I was
I know
telling
your
Calvin
blog
before
too,
we
right?
started. Yep. And it's nice. The blog I like because there's a real community of children's writers who blog.
Isn't it amazing? That's fun, yeah.
I've gotten to meet a lot of nice people. But the website especially is nice for kids who have read the book, because kids now can almost without fail, after they've read a book and enjoyed it, go and find the author online and actually send an email. And I always respond to kids, and that's nice to be able to, because kids always inevitably seem surprised when you write back.
Isn't it amazing?
And I love
Adults
that.
sometimes
So,
seem surprised when
yeah,
you write back.
yeah.
I find that too.
Like you're not
they
some ordinary person sitting down at
They
the
say,
computer
thank
in
you
your
very
pajamas.
much for answering my email, but
Yeah.
isn't that cool?
Yeah. So that's been really nice that people who have read the book and wanted to tell me what they thought have been able to find me.
And isn't it nice to know that you've had that kind of an impact? Of course, you impact kids' lives every single day.
Oh, thank
You
you.
inspire people with who you are and what you do. And the very fact that you write that sentence, I love kids and I love to write kids' books, was very, very impressive to me, because for me, that's a bottom line, right?
Well, that's what we're here for, right?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the artwork.
Yeah.
These 2 books look similar because they're both published by North Country Books, and they're both called The North Country Adventure.
Yeah.
But how about the artwork?
The artwork has a great little story with it. When I
knew it would.
Yeah. when I submitted Spitfire and finally heard that they were going to publish it, I was very excited and didn't entirely understand how this whole publication business worked.
Yeah.
And so my mom, who lives in the Finger Lakes, is an incredibly talented artist. She does oil painting. She works with oils
No
and
kidding.
acrylics. And she said, I had said, would you consider doing the cover? And she said, well, gosh, because she does a lot of lake
Come on,
scenes.
your mommy did
Well,
this?
she did.
Oh,
but
isn't that wonderful?
what I didn't really understand was that's not how it works with
No,
publishers.
they hate it.
Well, as an
Most
author, you're not
publishers do.
supposed to have really any involvement in that.
No,
But I didn't know that, and I'm gung-ho, and I'm really,
Yeah.
I'll say anything. So when they wanted the book, I said, that's awesome, thank you so much. I have this great idea for the cover. And they said, that's really nice, Kate, and we so appreciate it, but we do the cover, don't worry about it, we'll handle it. I said, well, yeah, but you don't understand. My mom is a really good artist, she's wonderful, and you really would like her work. They said, it really doesn't work that way. And we're sure she's very talented, but it really doesn't work that way. I said, can she just try and show you something? And they said, yes, she can show us something, but please
you're lucky.
understand we're probably not, gonna
Yeah.
use it because there's a certain way it has to be done. And so I told my mom that, and she said, oh, what the heck, I wanted to do a scene with a boat on the lake anyway. And so she did a painting, and it was not that painting, it was a different one.
Oh, wasn't this one?
And
Come
she
on.
sent it. It was actually dark, right? I wish I had it here for you.
Oh.
And she sent it, and they said, this is a stunning painting, but it's not really a kid's book cover. And my mom said, let me try again. So my mother went back to her easel, and she studied what a lot of kids' book covers looks like. We actually had some catalogs from like Penguin and HarperCollins, and she just looked at some of the covers and got the feel of a kid's book cover. And she said, send them this one, see what they think. And she emailed me a JPEG of that image that's on the cover now, and I sent it to North Country Books, and they said, we want this. That's the one.
How?
And so, yeah, so that's
You know,
where
that-
so we've gotten to do a couple
That
joint
blows
signings.
me away
Yeah.
because I'm not sure I know or anyone knows what makes a good children's book cover.
Yeah.
Because I've seen so many different kinds
Yeah.
and varieties.
And there is a wide variety.
But this is wonderful. Does
I
she
love
do
that
all
cover.
the drawings inside too?
No, the inside illustrator is totally separate. Her name is Martha Gully, and she is an incredibly talented artist as well.
You know-
She lives in Saranac.
Martha Gully
Martha Gully.
is Rob's sister.
Yes.
She's the one I was talking to you
Oh,
about,
okay. Yep.
about working at the office for the
Yeah,
aging.
and she's a wonderful lady. I never met her when she was
And
doing
it
the
was her other
illustrations.
sister that owned North Country Books with Rob
okay.
before she decided to leave the business.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that Martha had done the artwork.
She did. She did all the
See, it all
illustrations
goes-
for both of them.
it all
Yep,
goes
the
around
inside
in a circle.
illustrations. Yep. Yeah,
Isn't
and they're
that
wonderful.
interesting? I didn't
Yeah.
think she had any direct contact with
Oh no.
graphics
Yeah.
for books and
Yeah.
artwork.
Oh, she's incredible.
And
Incredibly
besides
talented.
being a wonderful person.
And very nice. Yeah, I never got to meet her until I
No
never
kidding.
met her when she was working on this because the artist and the author work very separately.
Oh, yes.
When a book is coming out.
Well, I had no idea. I'm so thrilled to
yeah.
learn that.
Yeah.
Because Martha's worked for the Office for the Aging, and I surmise that she still does, but we've been at the same tables in so many conferences
yeah.
and workshops and so on through
Yeah.
the years. And it was almost to the time when I was ready to retire from the probation department that she said, oh, by the way, my brother
Yeah. Yeah.
has North Country Books.
Yeah.
Now, did your mother also do the painting for this one?
Yep. When
Oh,
the
of
second
course.
when the second book came out and they said they said, and could you ask your mom if she wants to do the cover? So she was.
You know how rare
willing.
and unique that is.
Oh, it's been so special.
I
And
mean, I've
Alfie
been
was
through all
gonna-
the same things
yeah.
you do because I love
Yeah.
to draw.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
been a
know-
joy. Yeah.
And I know that, with the exception of if I happen to put out some books with my own drawings, that they would never accept any of my
Yeah.
own artwork.
Yeah,
Because,
it
as
doesn't
you
work
said,
that way.
publish-
But I didn't know that, of course, so leave it to me to
Probably,
argue
if
it.
you were to publish your books to any other publisher in the world, they wouldn't have let your
Right.
mother.
Right. Well, they were just open-minded enough, and they're a very small, very friendly publisher. They were open-minded enough to take a look, and then they said, "Oh, that works," and it worked out really well. So, and it's been a joy for me. My mom and I got to do a joint signing at the art gallery in Canandaigua, where she shows her work.
No
And
kidding.
so, yeah, we did that, and we did a signing at the library in the town where I grew up, which was amazingly special for me.
Is it
So,
at
yeah.
Medina?
Yeah.
Of all
Yeah.
wonderful places.
Yeah,
You acted surprised that I would even know where Medina
I was. It's not very big.
7,000. It's way bigger than Morrisonville.
Well, that's true.
And even bigger than Cliff Haven.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. So these are the first two. You're delighted with them.
Yes.
Can you tell us the title of the next one?
Oh yeah. Yep.
You can.
Yeah. All kinds of secrets. The next book that I have is actually not with North Country Books. It's with a national publisher because it's not it's not a regional historical novel. It's a contemporary novel, and it's called The Brilliant Fall of Gianna Z. And it's about a 7th grade girl named Gianna whose school leaf collection project is ruining her life. It's a funny book. It's also a novel for young readers, grades 4 through 8. And that one's going to be published in September by Walker, which is part of Bloomsbury.
Oh,
They're
yes,
based in New
by
York.
all
Yeah,
means.
yeah.
Wonderful.
So, and that's been a great experience too. It's been very different working with one of the bigger national publishers. Working with an editor in New York and the emailing back and forth, and it's been just a great learning experience.
You're on the next step. You're
Well,
on the
I don't know
next
if it's the
level.
next step. These books are awful special to me. They're different than the bigger ones, but the North Country Books I thought was great to work with too.
So
for
you
what those
have
books
to
are.
be grateful to have a publisher like
Oh,
North
yeah.
Country Books.
Yeah.
Right here in Utica, New
Yeah.
York, and a lot of people don't know where
Yeah.
the Utica, Rome area
Yeah.
is. And so that's good.
Yeah.
And they've given a lot of North Country writers, people from this area, their start. in
Yeah, they do
business.
a really nice job with what they do, and that's a niche that these two books probably they are so very local that they're not the kind of books that you would see with a HarperCollins or they're so specific and so local to our Lake Champlain that I was very thankful that they were here to fill that.
So you're not sure that you'll go back to this North Country historical theme?
Here's the thing. I right now have the book coming out in the fall about the leaf collection. And I have also a 2-book contract for a chapter book series for younger readers with Scholastic Press. And the first book is finished and they're working on an illustrator for it. And the second book I'm working on revising, and I have 2 other books that are novels that are at various stages, but all of which are contemporary. I will for sure write another historical novel. Where that ends up, depends on who wants it and who likes it and all
Well,
those things.
it's very difficult because you have a demanding profession which takes a lot of
right.
your energy and time
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're teaching kids and you want to
Yep.
be good at your job.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you don't always have time to write 1,000 words a day, do you?
Actually, where did you get that number? Because that's pretty much my number. That's the magic number in my brain. I try to get 1,000 words a night in.
That's a good magic number.
And a lot of nights I get there. I mean, most nights after, I don't write on weekends usually because that's our family time, but most
But
nights
you're
after my
very,
kids go to bed.
I say that because it requires a discipline that most writers
does.
don't have.
There are all
Successful
different
writers,
ways to
yeah.
write, I think. And I know people who have many, many books published who don't write every day and huge books and great books. So I think it depends on personal style, what works for you. But I find that working, for me, if I'm there every night, I don't get out of the habit. And so
Everybody's different, thank God
Yeah.
they are. And many writers do one book a year.
yeah.
And some writers do 5. Some people write 10
Yeah.
books a year, depending on what kind of writing it is. But some people can just write so fluently.
Yeah.
You think of
It's
all your
different.
favorite
Yeah.
authors, and if you like their books, you like to learn about who they are.
Yeah.
And so it must please you when people ask you about your people. Who was Kate Messner? How
Hope
did,
it's not a disappointment.
well, writers and creative people of all kinds are my favorite people because they see life far differently than the average person does.
I think writers sometimes appreciate and notice things
They
that not
see
everybody
through layers
does.
of things that
Yeah.
most of us just, you walk through a room and you see things that
Yeah.
might attract your attention that most of us,
Yeah.
mere mortals, would never pick up on. But that's where that creative juice comes from, isn't
I
it?
think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
I think it's just fantastic what you've done so far. Did you bring another book on purpose? What's
I
this?
brought that out. I was showing Calvin because I have a picture. I write everything from picture books on up to books for middle grade readers.
Yeah.
And I have a picture book that the literary agent I work with sold to Chronicle Books last year.
Ah.
And Chronicle is they do beautiful, beautiful picture books. I love their books. They're based out in California, and they're going to be publishing my book called Over and Under the Snow, which is
Oh, I
about...
like that.
Thanks.
No, I love it. What a title.
It's about animals. It's about a girl who goes cross-country skiing in the Adirondacks and discovers all the things that are going on under the snow as she's skiing over the snow. And it's probably going to be a bedtime story for a lot of people. It's very lyrical and sort of a quiet book about animals under the snow, and the girl is
And
going to
relatively short or
give
long?
that. It's short. It's a picture book, so it's like
Yeah.
it's like
2 or
a
3
10-minute
lines?
read aloud
Yeah.
at night.
Ah.
Yeah, like a 10-minute read aloud before bed. And Chronicle was in the process of choosing an illustrator for that book, and actually has been for quite a while because that book sold in April of this year. So from April of last spring until now, I hadn't really heard anything. But just a few weeks before Christmas, I got an email from my editor letting me know that there were 2 illustrators they were considering who were doing sample spreads. So, in other words, they had given the text to both of the illustrators, and they were kind of trying out, which really freaks me out, the idea that somebody's, trying out
Don't
to
you love
illustrate
it?
this little story. But we saw the 2 sample spreads, and they were both beautiful. But the illustrator they ended up choosing, was Christopher Silas Neal. And he's an incredible, incredible artist. He teaches illustration and lives in Brooklyn. And he has done he hasn't done any picture books. This will be his first
No
picture book.
kidding.
But he's done an awful lot of like music posters and album covers. And he did the cover for, when she said the name, I said, oh, I know that artist. Because I had just picked up this book to teach to my 7th graders in my classroom. And this is Chains by Laurie Haltz Anderson, who's one of my favorite authors. And this is a story of the American Revolution too. But she mentioned Chris Silas Neal. I said, he did the cover for the book I'm teaching right now. And he was the illustrator that they ended up choosing to do Over and Under the Snow. So he is either working on or will soon be working on the illustrations for that picture book.
How many for the book, do you know?
I believe it's going to be 12 spreads. So 12 paintings,
Ooh, wow.
that he's working on. Yeah.
And it's something that our audience may not have thought about. But sometimes finishing a picture book takes as long as it does to write a novel like Spitfire or Champlain and the
Yeah,
Silent
sometimes
One.
it's harder for me.
Because you revise the same sentence over and over and over again. And editors are so picayune when it comes to picture books because they want to present that sentence in exactly the right way.
Well, when
And
you've
once
got-
again, it's
yeah.
hard for us to understand how that works.
Yeah.
We read the book and our 7-year-old or
Right.
4-year-old loves it.
And it goes by so quickly.
And it goes by so
Yeah.
quickly. But it is important because believe me, when you get into picture books, you have competition that's incredible. Just look on the shelves of Borders books sometimes
yeah,
here,
yeah.
and you'll see what kind of competition.
And those are the
there is.
ones that get published. The
Yeah.
ones in the pile with your manuscript are, yeah. I have a pile of unpublished picture books at home too.
Isn't it amazing?
yeah.
Do you love to look through children's books when you go to a bookstore like this one and
Yeah.
all the many other
Oh, I
bookstores?
ogle the books, yes. Yeah,
It's
I
like
love it.
most men, I guess, would get lost in a hardware store. My wife and I are both that way.
Oh, yeah.
Not only looking for books for ourselves here and in libraries, but in other places as well, because it's just so much fun to look through the stacks in the library.
Yeah. I read a ton of kids' books too. I think that's one of a lot of times people who email will say, well, how can I get published? And I think reading books in the genre that you want to write is probably the best thing as far as learning how they work and learning the structure of a picture book or the voice of a chapter book and that sort of thing. So I read a ton. I read probably 2 or 3 books a week.
Tell me, explain for our viewers what a chapter book is, because a lot of people aren't familiar
I'm
with the,
throwing that out there.
nomenclature,
Yeah.
you know?
A chapter book is a book for kids who have just recently learned to read on their own. And so when I say chapter book, I'm talking about a book that's maybe 5,000 or 6,000 words long or 10,000. And it's meant for young readers who are like 6 to 8 or 9 years old. And so books like the Magic Tree House series, the Junie B. Jones series, what else? Judy Moody. Those are chapter books. They're meant for kids to read on their own or as a read aloud, but they're the first books a lot of times that kids will pick up and read with chapters all by themselves. And then when we talk about a picture book, we're talking about books for kids who are usually, well, from birth, right on up to 5, 6, 7 years old, but the books where there are actually color illustrations and then a couple lines of text usually on each page, and those are the books that parents are reading aloud to kids at night. Most picture books are read to be read out loud by a parent or somebody who loves the child rather than the child reading to themselves, although they do that themselves too. My kids, my daughter's certainly capable of reading all kinds of books, but she'll pick up picture books too, and I read picture books.
How
I
old
love
are your
them.
kids now?
7, 12. Yeah.
Oh, it's hard
Getting
to
big.
believe.
They go so fast, don't they? Yeah. They're some of my best critics. Just this morning, I'm just finishing working on a new book that my daughter has known I was working on for a long time, and it's about an ice skater, a figure skater. And she's been dying to read it, and of course I said, you gotta wait till I finish, because that's kind of my thing. I have to finish the draft, and then I can share. But we were reading the first chapters together this morning, and she was helping me. She's a good little editor. She is a good little editor.
does?
Oh, she's phenomenal.
Is she
yeah.
honest in her appraisal?
Oh, she catches things. Honestly, I think it's the same kind of thing. She'll point out things, and I'll have an editorial letter from New York on the desk that points out the same problem. From my editor in
Well, that you can't beat
Yeah,
that
she's got a
perspective
future.
right
Yeah.
in your own household.
Yeah, they're
But
both
did they
great.
start to read early? Both of
My
your kids?
They love to read. Yeah. That's what
really,
we do.
really
We don't-
early?
I don't know if really, really early, but they.
Some kids just start to read
Yeah.
before you would even imagine. I can even remember now, as ancient as I am, almost demanding that my mother teach me to read because I had a brother who was 4 years old.
Oh, and you feel like you're missing
And I watched
something.
I watched him go off to school every day. And I was really mad because I couldn't go off to school
Yes.
every day. So I wanted to be able to read by the time I went to school.
I grew up the youngest of 4, and I remember I learned to read when I was, I think, 4 or 5. But I remember feeling like there were secrets in there, and I couldn't get the secrets until I figured out the code. And I remember wanting to read in the worst way because my brothers and sisters are all you know, 7, 10, 12 years older than I am. So they were reading from the time I was born, and I always was like, why can you do that and I can't?
You
know?
just articulated it perfectly. Secrets in there, and you wanted to learn the code.
And it's true.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And every single book that was ever written has secrets in there if you learn the code. And when you have a voracious appetite, as you do and as I do, you can't wait to get in there.
Yeah.
And you know, I feel the same way, and I'm really digressing now.
That's okay.
But because I was in the radio business for a long time, I feel that same way about old records.
Yeah.
You take an old record that's in somebody's attic for the last 80 years, and you drop the needle on that record for the first time since 1929, and you found the code. You're unlocking the secrets of what's in it. It's like opening a time capsule.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
So were you discouraged forever, Kate, of writing a book about time travel after that first experience?
Oh, no.
Do you think you might do it sometime?
I'm probably the best thing that's happened to me in the past couple of years. I've had a great number of successes along the way, and I'm so thankful for those, because part of it is working hard, but part of it is being in the right place in the right time too. So, but part of what I've gotten from that is I will try anything, and I will have an idea that seems to me like the dumbest idea ever, but I'll sit down and write a couple chapters of it, and it either seems like it's going to work or it doesn't. And I have countless pieces of things on my computer that I might come back to or might not, and so I'll never say never about the time travel. I would try anything.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I love it. We're going to take a little break and
All
be right back. I want to dissect this book just a little bit, because historical novels have to have a basis in fact.
Yeah.
Even though the book in toto is largely fiction, there are real characters in this book especially.
Right. Yeah.
Tell me how that happened, how your main character met Samuel de Champlain, for example.
Yeah, I always, when I read a historical novel, want to know where the history and the fiction meet. So in this
it's not
book,
always easy to tell.
It's not. I usually put an author's note in the back, because I always think, as a reader, I want to know that, so I try to provide that. But Champlain in the silent one, Samuel de Champlain, obviously, we know is a real historical figure. But the main character who actually narrates this story, the boy on the cover, is Silent One, and he is a fictional character based on many Native Americans who were with Champlain on his journey. Champlain came here and he's exploring these rivers, and he didn't know the area, and the people who were already here did. So he really relied on them, and in fact appreciated their efforts to guide him. But this book opens with a scene from Samuel de Champlain's journal that he writes about in the winter of 1608 and 1609. And it was one of the first winters that Champlain and his men were in Quebec, and it was one of the most brutal winters anybody had ever seen in this area. And Silent One's people, who were Innu, the French called them the Montagnais, but their name for themselves was Innu, were hunter-gatherers at this time. They hadn't developed agriculture like the Iroquois to the south, who could grow corn because they were just that much further north. And so they still kind of went from place to place, So they would, in the spring when the eel were running and the fish were running, they would fish and collect them and they would dry them. And when the eel ran out, they had to send hunting parties out to, look for moose, to look for caribou and animals like that. And so they were actually out with a hunting party that had pushed into Quebec and down the St. Lawrence and got to the point on the St. Lawrence River where they could look across and see Samuel Champlain and his men in the buildings. They called it the l'habitation, the habitation we would call it today. But his set of buildings, they had a storehouse and quarters where they lived. And that winter was so rough that this group of native peoples were starving. It was a real serious issue then, starvation, because you just were so dependent upon the weather. And so there's an account in Champlain's journal of this hunting party of Innu who were so weak from lack of food that they could barely stand. And he was on the other side of the river watching them. And they were calling for Champlain and his men to come across. And the men said, no, we can't. The river was full of ice. It was raging. It was a blizzard. They knew that any boat that went in there was going to be destroyed. So as a last-ditch effort, the native people on the other side knew that they were, not going to survive without food. They watched and they waited until there was a break in the ice in the river, and they pushed their birch bark canoes in to try and get across. Well, as soon as they got halfway across, a huge piece of ice came down the river and started barreling toward them. It crushed their canoes, but by some, stroke of luck, they were thrown from the canoe onto this other huge piece of ice, almost like a raft. And that piece of ice was pushed up onto the shore, basically right at Champlain's feet. And I read that account in Champlain's journal and thought, well, there's a fine introduction, isn't it? Here we are, in this very dramatic, situation. And you can't make those things up.
No.
So when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the best first chapter. I have to have this as the first chapter. And I knew that I wanted a native voice telling the story, but I hadn't really settled on who exactly it would be. But because the way it worked was, if I wanted that scene, my voice had to be Innu. It had to, because the Algonquin hadn't joined them yet. That was just the Innu. So I thought, okay, the main character's going to be Innu. And so the very opening chapter of Champlain and the Silent One starts with a quote from Champlain's journal. And maybe I can, is it all right if I read that to you?
I would love to have you.
Starts from a quote with Champlain's journal, where he says, on the 5th of February, it snowed violently, and the wind was high for 2 days. On the 20th, some Indians appeared on the other side of the river, calling to us to go to their assistance, which was beyond our power on account of the large amount of ice drifting in the river. So that's from the actual document that Champlain wrote. And then after that, Silent One's voice begins to tell his account of that story and how that was their only option, and how they decided they had to do it. And there were children. There were women with children on their backs riding this ice raft eventually up onto the shore. It was a pretty amazing scene. So that's how my main character, Silent One, meets Champlain. And it's a very very fragile relationship at first, as it must have been, because Champlain did not speak the native languages. He later had a couple young people who were with him, a couple of young Frenchmen who learned some of the native languages, and they served as translators. And one of my characters in this book is modeled after them too, because I started this book and I thought, really, what were you thinking? You're writing a book in English about people who didn't speak English and also didn't speak one another's language. So anytime Champlain is trying to communicate with the natives or vice versa, they're having to do it through this one boy who's a translator, who really isn't around all the time anyway, and the rest of the time they're just sort of looking at each other. And there was a time when I was writing this and I thought, really, this wasn't a good idea, But it did work out eventually. And to be honest, thinking through that struggle made me all the more appreciative of the relationship that they were able to establish, between Champlain and the natives of the Huron and Algonquin and Innu, with such limited communication. It was pretty amazing.
You know what? Writers are amazing. You're an amazing lady. Okay.
Thank you.
It's to me, it's delicious to see that in people, because you're able to remove yourself from the sometimes mundane here and now, and transport yourself into that world of, there's that word again, imagination.
Yeah.
And it's a good place.
It is, and that's why I love it.
Sometimes things are so nasty around us, we have to do that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they're nasty where we're going too. There were some scenes in both of these books that I wrote with, and really struggled, because you know what you said is you have to remove yourself and go there.
Yeah.
And that's really true. And there have been scenes that I have written that I've been happy to get back from, because they're not pleasant.
For you, it has to become an almost real experience for you to transform it into words, so that other people can feel that. And that's the reason we read books, to be transported.
Yeah.
So that's not always a bad thing.
No, it's not.
When we read about the Irish potato famine, it's terrible.
And to understand, to be able to place yourself in another person's shoes, even if it's somebody who was alive a long time ago. So.
And when you transport yourself back into times that make up the fabric of the history of northern New York, it's a revelation. but it helps to. It's painting by number.
Yeah.
And you fill in those little.
Yeah.
If you put the jigsaw puzzle back together and get the pieces together, and for you when you finish it, and it's in, and you know people are in little corners reading it right now. What a delightful feeling
it
has
is.
to be.
It is. It's great to talk with kids about the book. And it's interesting, kids have views on the books, and I've read authors talking about this before, but it hadn't really happened to me until this year. Kids will have questions about a book and say, I noticed that this character reacted to this character this way, and I think it's because of her relationship with her brother. And I'm like, maybe that's why she did that.
Oh,
you know,
your little book clubs, huh?
But they do, and they come up with things that you didn't maybe even consciously put there. But then I'll look back and I'll say, yeah, that is there. It's really interesting.
And you use visual aids when you when you talk to kids. Well, the first thing I noticed when I walked in
my top hat
was this delightful top hat. Not necessarily a stovepipe hat a la Abe Lincoln, but a top hat. And I was immediately transported back to my childhood because my father was a magician as well as being a minister. And there were always top hats.
What a combination that is.
A magi minister, he called himself. And always top hats around the house because there were things being
There's
pulled
no
out
rabbit
of
in
hats.
that one.
No rabbit. I looked
Not today.
for it. But why would you take this hat with you?
Well, this book, I mean, we a lot of times, and I hope we'll talk a lot more about this as the quadricentennial comes around. And we're just less than a week away now from 2009 and the 400th anniversary of Champlain's voyage.
Absolutely.
But sometimes we forget why Champlain and his men were even here. And I'm gonna reach behind you, Gordy.
That's all right.
It was because of this. This
Oh,
is a beaver pelt that I also bring when I go to schools.
Where did you find this?
I looked all over for one that I could buy that I knew the beaver had been killed by a car because I didn't want anything killed for my school visit. So this beaver was hit by a car. And then the taxidermist took care of the preserving
we
it.
needed to know that it was roadkill.
When I was looking for one, my father said, why don't you just go buy one? You can buy one here. I said, I don't want one killed for my behalf. So,
God. She drove around.
Well, that was actually my first idea, and I was... you don't even want to go there. My husband was like, I am not putting a dead beaver in the car.
Okay.
So... But this is a beaver pelt, and I take this to school so kids can see it because a lot of kids have never seen one. But this is really what this whole time period was about. The French had, and all of Europe really, but particularly the men of Paris, had developed an affinity for these beaver felt hats. And this doesn't really look anything like this, and you probably can't see it all that well on the camera, but this is a very, very fine
there's a texture.
Felt. It feels like velvety, like very, very soft fur. And it's the under fur of this beaver pelt. If you were to pluck out all these long hairs, what's left would be this very, very fine fur that they used for their hats in Europe. And that was very fashionable. If you were a gentleman in Europe, you had to have your beaver felt hat. And it was so fashionable, in fact, that they had hunted the European beaver almost to the point of extinction. And so you just couldn't find the beaver anymore in Europe, and it was still a very hot commodity. So, as you know, many of our voyages to the New World were about money, were about the economy, and there became an economy of beaver pelts. So when they sent over the first explorers and they figured out that there was not only some animals here, but plentiful animals, they sent more, and then the fur trade basically was established. So when we talk about 1609, we're actually talking about the very early days of the fur trade that would last well into the 1800s. And Champlain and his men were here to trade with the Native Americans for fur. And they would trade copper kettles, was a big thing because at the time, the Algonquins and the Huron and the Iroquois too cooked in these clay pots. And a clay pot was, it worked, but you couldn't put a clay pot over the fire and heat it up to make your stew because it would break. So what they had to do was they would take the clay pot and they would fill it with water, and then they would put rocks in the fire and heat the stones until they became very, very hot. And then they'd one by one put the stones into this water to heat the water till it was pretty hot. I mean, they never actually got it as hot as you would like your water to be, and it never actually cooked the meat all the way, but it sort of cooked it. And so that was how they cooked. Well, when the Europeans showed up and they had copper pots that you could put right over the fire and they heated up like that, and they could cook your meat all the way and make your stew so much faster, it was sort of miraculous. And they were amazed that all the Europeans, all the French wanted in return for these, magical pots were these, which the Native Americans had plenty of because they had never overhunted before. They used beaver, they would eat the meat, and they used these for all kinds of clothing. They would use them for blankets on the bed and mats and everything because they were plentiful. But there was never that whole supply and demand issue. There was never an economy, and so they never overhunted, and so there was a very healthy population here. And it was after the French came that there became this sort of economy and this demand for as many beaver as you could possibly kill, that we started to see some of the same issues here with ecology that existed in Europe. So that's one of the things that I talk about when I go into schools.
It helps when you have something like this.
It does. And kids like to touch things. I'm a kid at heart, and I like to touch things too. I never like it when I go to a museum and you have to stay back from things. So I always bring things that kids can touch, and I pass everything around.
We always call them visual aids,
Yeah.
If you've got a picture of something, or better yet, the real thing. And I'm sure we tell all the kids that these were roadkill.
Sometimes I don't tell them, but when they ask, where did you get that, I actually tell them that it was one that was killed by a car.
Kids are intuitive, and as you've already pointed out, extremely bright, far brighter sometimes than we give them credit for when we talk to them. So I almost never talk down to kids, do you?
Oh gosh, no. And they ask some of the most perceptive questions, sometimes more than adults.
Oh,
absolutely. Adults come up, sometimes and will say, why don't you write a book for grown-ups? And the kids want to ask, really detailed things about characters' motivations and the theme, and they'll ask great questions. Like, what do you think? They'll take a character from a book and say, what do you think this character would think of this situation going on in the world today? I mean, really interesting questions.
Isn't that amazing? The best question I was ever asked in a school, because I was reading one of my simple little books to the kids, and I said, are there any questions? And one little tiny child in the front row said, yes. Are you related to Stuart Little?
Oh, I love that. I hope you said yes.
And I did.
In spirit you are.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, that's wonderful.
But anyway,
Little.
Kids do. I'm sure you are constantly inspired by kids.
Oh, yeah.
Because, sometimes we're condescending in our remarks about children, our kids today, and, in my day and back in the old days. Well, guess what? Kids are smarter today than they've ever been. Just give them good books to read. It's an interesting time that we're in, and we might as well wax philosophical at this point in the interview, but there's a lot of competition for your books today.
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean just among other good,
not just my books.
great writers like
books.
you are, but media in general.
Oh, yeah. There's
so much of what my wife calls passive entertainment.
Yeah.
I wouldn't in any way try to discredit the medium of television, because we're using it right now for a very good cause. And hopefully viewing this interview with Kate Messner is not totally passive, but sometimes we fancy ourselves so burned out by life in general that we want to just, we sit down and turn what my wife sometimes calls the boob tube, push the on button and say, all right, entertain me.
Feed me. Yeah.
Feed me.
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot to be said for opening a book and, as you said, discovering the code, for transferring those individual words into real emotions and real pictures. I mean, how many times have you read a book, not just children's books, but books in general, and not just the Bible, as we referred to moments ago? How often have you read a book and it profoundly affected you?
Oh, yeah. And kids' books as much as adult books.
Oh, I do too.
My daughter sometimes gets impatient because if I'm reading a really good part of, we just finished the 7th Harry Potter, I was reading it with my 7-year-old, and I cannot get through the end of that book without just a downright sobbing. So she's waiting and waiting and waiting for me to finish reading. I'm like, and then Mrs. Weasley, but they do. They're so real, and the characters become so real, and yeah, I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, it's easy to get moved by words, but if we can convey that feeling via the television set to parents whose lives are pretty hectic and crazy these days, as we're recording this toward the end of 2008. But there comes a time when you have to step back and you have to find a refuge in the world of literature, don't you?
I think so. For me, anyway.
For me too, and it pleases me to find somebody else who is moved by literature. That's why I mention it, because I do read books and weep on the pages. Yeah, and that's a tribute to the author, right?
I think so.
Because sometimes things are lost in the translation, but
not just that. I think one of the things that I love about books, and that I've loved about having my own books out there in the world, and we laughed about how I wanted to, gather them all up, because suddenly, when I saw it published, this thing that had been just mine for so long doesn't just belong to me anymore. But I think that's the really magical thing about books, is that it's so much an interaction between reader and writer, and the different things that kids will say about Spitfire, for instance, and the parts that they liked, or they always like to say, my favorite part was, and sometimes it's a funny part, and sometimes it's a slightly bawdy part, and they have different favorite parts, but it so depends on who the child is and what's important to them, and what they connect with in a character. And I have girls come up to me and say, you know what? I'm like Abigail, just so proud of that, and rightfully
Isn't that
so.
cool? Isn't that
but
neat?
It's pretty neat, yeah, it's pretty
whether
amazing.
they have red hair or not, right?
Right.
I love it. So what have you got in the bag? Have you got future projects?
I've got future. Well, let me see what I got here. I brought my. Oh, this is kind of fun. This is one
Well,
of my
really-
revision messes. Lest you think that people with published books do things tidily.
It's nice to know, to let people know that there is a path, sometimes circuitous, from here to there.
Yeah. My path is
From
very
the time you get an
circuitous.
idea from writing a book
Yeah.
until it comes out in a wonderful polished and finished form like this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not only circuitous, but torturous.
Yeah. Here and there.
I
mean, I will, when I write a book, like the project that I'm working on right now is a middle grade novel called Sugar on Snow. And I don't know when anybody will ever get to read it, because it's not under contract.
There is a wonderful North Country book called...
A picture book.
Not a picture book.
Oh, no?
There's a wonderful North Country book by a North Country author called Sugar on Snow.
And is it nonfiction?
And it's nonfiction.
Okay, yes.
Written by a very good friend of mine and ours, whose name is Jane Lawless Murphy, who graduated from Plattsburgh State, was an actress and still is a singer. She and her husband, Charles, live on Long Island, but it's a first effort written for the benefit of her 90-some-year-old mother about her childhood growing up on Rand Hill in the town of Beekmantown. But I used the word delicious to describe the book because it applies. It's one of those things where you say, oh my gosh, this is beautiful.
The memories, I bet.
And it's called Sugar on Snow because that's one of our fondest memories of growing up in the North Country, is having sugar on snow.
Yeah. Well, this book is actually about a girl who lives up by the Canadian border on a maple farm.
There you
and
go.
gets a scholarship to train in the world of Lake Placid figure skating, which can be pretty tough and competitive.
Yeah.
So she's a little bit out of her element. But I just finished writing the first draft a couple days ago, and you and I talked about how I like revising better than drafting. So this morning I was reading the bits and pieces of the book and starting to work on some really rough early revision notes. What I'll do is I'll take the book that I have right now, which is I think 18 or 19 chapters, and go through chapter and by chapter, and I'll fix everything that I know is a mess already. Like I know, I have a bad habit. I'll go get partway through a book and decide I don't like a character's name anymore, and so I'll just change it in the middle of a chapter.
No.
And yeah, Luke is now Alex, and Elizabeth is now Abby. So I do all sorts of things. But I just keep a list of, it's my known issues.
This is
list
the
of
teacher
things
in
I
there.
need to fix. And then this is...
Nobody would make a chart like this if they weren't a teacher.
Okay, here's what this is for. This chart is so I can see gaps. because you see how I also have like this character, Hannah. I introduce her in the beginning of the book, and then she's gone the whole rest of the book. And you can't
Just
do
take
that in a
take a
novel.
look at this. There's not another
But-
author in the world.
Oh, there
who-
are. You wouldn't
are there
believe what
really?
people do. Yeah.
I've never
yeah.
seen a chart like this in my life.
But that's so I can make sure when I introduce a character or an element that that character is consistent throughout the book, or that if there's going to be like a, there's an issue in this book with the maple farm and her connection to that farm giving her inner strength when she's in this other world. And I need to make sure that that theme stays through the book and that it's a thread that's woven through consistently. And this helps me do that. And this helps me remember things that I need to fix later on. So this is the messy part of writing.
But everybody writes differently. Everybody
do.
has a different style. Everybody
Yeah.
does it in a different way, but
And every book is different too, I find. Every book I write teaches me to write that book, and then the next one I encounter a whole different set of...
don't
Are you showing
love-
my mess there, Courtney?
Don't just to
That's
show
okay.
people what you
No,
go
you can
what
do
you
that.
go through.
That's all
And
right, yeah.
How pleasing it is for people like you and me to find original manuscripts.
Oh, yeah.
And to look
Yeah.
at the author's notes,
Yeah.
saying, calling themselves stupid and ignoramus
Yeah.
and crossing
A lot of
things
X's.
out and X's.
Yeah.
It reminds me of my first creative writing class at college.
It's better when you make those marks yourself, though, instead of having somebody else make them
When
in
my
red pen.
professor Hazlitt would take my work and, he would say wordy, wordy, wordy. That was my downfall. I had to use
That's you and me both, Gordy.
12 adjectives
Yeah.
and none of them fit. And he would just write, no, down the side. And, tragically, my mother saved every one of those. So I relived the pain of all those comments from 1955
Yeah,
even
but now
today.
you can say, see?
It's interesting, because you went through a metamorphosis, through great changes from the time you started
yeah.
writing. And like you, my mother sent me all my little poetry books and all the things that I wrote in when I was a little child. And it pleases me to go back to see,
yeah.
to get, once again, that paint by number
Yeah.
picture. So list for me a few of the projects that you have coming up, let's say in the next 2 years.
Okay.
Besides this.
I can't. Well, this is not under contract, and this may never see the light of day.
Oh, yes, it
and
will.
I hope it will, and
Oh, yes, it
I'm
will.
working on it, but this could land anywhere. So, but what I know you'll be able to read is September. Is my first national book. It's with Walker, which is part of Bloomsbury. It's coming out in hardcover. It's The Brilliant Fall of Gianna Z.
I love it.
That's the
I
one about the girl with
wait.
leaf collection project. That one is
Oh,
inspired by
what
many
a tremendous concept.
many years of 7th graders at Stafford Middle
Oh,
School who
isn't
had
that
to do
great?
leaf projects. And I have heard more stories about what went wrong during those
I
leaf
still
projects.
have leaf projects from
Yeah.
60 years ago.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's going to be a fun one because there's it's funny, but there's also a lot of science in it. There's a lot of botany in that book and a lot of family relationships
That's
too.
wonderful.
And then the next one to come out is probably going to be Marty McGuire, Frog Princess. Which is the first in a series with Scholastic. There'll be at least 2 Marty books from Scholastic and maybe more, we'll see. But Marty McGuire is a 3rd grader who wants to be a scientist when she grows up. She does not want to be a ballerina, and doesn't like tiaras and doesn't like tutus and doesn't like dresses, but they make her be the princess in the school play. And it's about how she handles that. There are pretty comic results to her being cast as this princess. She kind of finds a way to make the part her own. And then the second Marty McGuire book doesn't have a title yet, but it's going to be about an environmental contest at Marty's school. And there are worms involved.
Of course
they get loose, too.
Of course.
And those 2 are both with Scholastic. And then I have a picture book that's under contract with Chronicle Books. They do a lot of picture books, and that's called Over and Under the Snow.
Oh,
And
I
it's
like that. I
about-
love that idea too.
I'm excited about that one. I loved that. Writing that was probably the easiest the picture book I've written that's undergone the least revision. But that was inspired. I was actually on a field trip with my 7th graders at the Visitors Interpretive Center at Paul Smith's, and we were snowshoeing. And one of my kids said, "Hey, what's that?" And the naturalist who was with us said, "Oh, stop! There's been a visitor from the Subnivian zone."
Oh.
And I said, the Subnivian zone. And I love that word, Subnivian. It just sounds subversive and secret. And she said, look. And we looked, and there was a little tiny set of tracks, and they led from a hole near a tree to another hole in the middle of the snow, and they disappeared, and they were gone. And she said, what you don't understand is that there is a whole secret world under your feet right now. There's a network of tunnels, and moles and voles and sometimes red squirrels use that network so they can travel in winter without being seen by the predators like the hawks and the owls that are flying above. And so the whole rest of the day, I was taking care of my 7th graders and I was buckling snowshoes. But this other part of my brain was thinking, secret world under the snow. Ooh. And so on the bus, on the way back, I turned over the attendance sheet and I wrote a rough draft of a little story. And later that night, I spent a couple hours and polished it up and did some more revision after that. But the result was this picture book called Over and Under the Snow. And it's about a girl who goes cross-country skiing with her father, and she sees a red squirrel disappear through a crack. And she says, well, where did he go? And then the whole rest of the book says, well, over the snow, this is happening, and under the snow, and it talks about all the animals and what goes on underneath the snow as this girl is skiing over it to a campfire in the woods.
I love it.
So
Kate
I'm really
Messner,
excited about that one.
You have inspired me and hopefully everybody else who has their
thank you,
television
Marty.
set on now. Thank you for all the contributions you've made and the many contributions you're going to make in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
You will follow your career to the nth degree. Kate Messner, Our Little Corner, it's always so much fun. I want to mention Borders Books and thank them for allowing us to come into their wonderful solarium in the back of the store. We've been here before and will no doubt be here in the future, maybe talking with Kate about some of her books that are coming
I would
out.
be happy to come back.
It's been great fun. We want to wish everybody the best who's watching this program. And as we always say at the end, who knows where we're going to be next time for Our Little Corner.